A missing girl, a silver bracelet, and a birthmark no one could forget. When a young farmer crosses paths with the richest family in town, her entire past begins to unravel. The sharp morning sun glinted off the platinum Rolex on Julian Maddox's wrist as he leaned against his Ferrari, flanked by his brothers, Brandon and Elias. The three Maddox heirs stood out like luxury imports in the rustic charm of the Meadowbrook Saturday Market, a cozy yet bustling spot just outside the affluent town of Glenhaven Hills, where their sprawling family estate had long been a symbol of legacy and power. Clad in casually impeccable outfits that cost more than most vendors earned in a month, they looked more like visitors from a glossy magazine than patrons of the local harvest. "Dad says we need to get grounded," Julian said, mimicking their father's gravelly tone with mock solemnity, drawing smirks from his brothers. "Apparently, buying strawberries from farmers makes us more ethical investors." At 28, Julian was the eldest and the most jaded of the three, his jet-black hair slicked back from a sharply angled face that often appeared in tabloids labeled Glenhaven's most eligible bachelor. Brandon, 26, was broader-shouldered, still fit from his college rowing days, and scrolled idly through his phone, barely acknowledging the hand-woven baskets and colorful produce stalls. But Elias, 24, seemed genuinely curious about the place. His warm hazel eyes, inherited from their late mother, scanned the lively market with interest. "Honestly, it's not terrible," he murmured, catching the scent of baked bread and freshly cut herbs. "And the coffee's pretty decent." Their father, Charles Maddox, CEO of Maddox Capital, had mandated this little excursion after a heated board meeting in which all three brothers dismissed growing concerns about labor conditions in their overseas facilities. It was his way of teaching humility by sending his sons among real folks to develop empathy. And since their trust fund stipends depended on proving their personal growth, they'd grudgingly complied. "Let's just grab something for the chef and go," Brandon muttered, sliding his phone into his pocket. Estelle said she needed strawberries for that tart Dad likes. As if conjured by his words, they noticed a modest strawberry stand at the far end of the market row, while other booths were adorned with chalkboard signs and stylized crates. This one was little more than a plain wooden table with baskets of vivid red berries, carefully tended by a young woman in worn jeans and a faded linen blouse. Her sun-kissed auburn hair was tied in a low braid, and she moved with a quiet efficiency, offering soft smiles that lit up her otherwise delicate features. "Perfect," Julian said with a bored sigh. "We'll grab the berries, snap a photo for Instagram, and call it a transformative experience." They approached the stand just as the surrounding crowd dispersed, giving them a clear look at the vendor. Up close, she looked even younger, perhaps 21 or 22, with a spray of freckles across her nose and amber-colored eyes that tugged at Elias's memory for reasons he couldn't quite place. "How much?" Julian asked flatly. The young woman looked up, meeting his gaze with those striking amber eyes. $8 for the small basket, $15 for the large. Picked at dawn. $15 for strawberries? Brandon scoffed. "What is this, organic gold?" Her expression faltered, but her voice remained level. "I grow them myself, pesticide-free. Local soil, no shortcuts." Elias noticed a small scar just near her temple, partly hidden by a loose strand of hair. A strange wave of recognition hit him, unexplainable but persistent. He blinked it away as Julian handed over a 50. "We'll take the big one," Julian said. "Keep the change. Buy yourself something nicer to wear." The young woman's hand paused above the berries. In her eyes, something flickered pain, but also pride. "I don't take tips wrapped in insults," she replied, sliding the bill back. "And I don't need wardrobe advice from someone who's never dirtied his hands." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know who we are?" "Should I?" "We're the Maddox brothers," Brandon said sharply, as in Maddox Capital, Maddox Media, Maddox Aerospace. "Heard of us?" "I have," she said, her tone cool. "Still doesn't give you the right to be rude." Elias, watching her closely, was shaken by how familiar her body language felt, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when flustered or tilted her head slightly when standing her ground. Something about her was deeply, unsettlingly known. "What's your name?" he asked, suddenly cutting through the tension. She hesitated, then answered, "Keisha." Julian gave a wry chuckle. "Not exactly a name that gets you past the country club gates." Keisha handed over the basket, lips pressed tight. "Not all of us were born with yachts waiting at the dock. Some of us have to earn our place." As she reached forward, her sleeve shifted just enough to reveal a crescent-shaped birthmark on her inner wrist, deep brown, like a smudge of coffee in the shape of a moon. Elias's heart stopped. He had seen that birthmark before. In old family photos. On a girl who vanished 14 years ago. On Keisha Maddox. "I think we're done here," Julian said curtly, grabbing the berries. "Enjoy your booth, miss." Keisha. Free advice attitude won't help you sell fruit. As they turned to leave, Elias hesitated. His eyes remained on Keisha, heart pounding. That crescent birthmark. The amber eyes. Even the scar near her temple, it all connected, as impossible as it seemed. "That mark on your wrist," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You've always had it?" Keisha instinctively pulled her sleeve down, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Yeah, since I was a kid." "Why?" "No reason," Elias murmured, taking the basket from her. "Thanks for the strawberries." Back at the Maddox estate, lunch was served on the terrace beneath flowering vines and manicured hedges. Julian and Brandon chatted, debating which private equity firm had offered the worst coffee at their last meeting. But Elias wasn't listening. His thoughts were back at the market with Keisha. The birthmark, the eyes, that faint scar near her hairline. Everything about her pulled at his memory, stirring feelings he hadn't let himself explore in years. Because 14 years ago, when Elias was only 10, their youngest sibling, 7-year-old Keisha Maddox, had disappeared during a family vacation in Italy. One moment she was running across a piazza chasing pigeons, the next gone. No witnesses, no ransom, just silence. Their mother had never recovered. Celia Maddox, once the emotional core of the family, withered under the weight of grief. Cancer took her 5 years later. Their father, Charles, responded differently. He grew colder, more focused, doubling down on empire building. The name Keisha was never spoken aloud again. Her nursery in the East Wing remained untouched, a locked memorial behind frosted glass. No one believed she could still be alive. No one except Elias. He stood abruptly, ignoring Brandon's sarcastic comment about skipping dessert. "I need to check something," he muttered, already moving toward the house. In his father's private study, Elias unlocked the bottom drawer of an old cabinet. Inside were family albums barely touched in a decade. He flipped through them until he found it, Keisha's 7th birthday. She was laughing in the photo, caught mid-motion with chocolate frosting on her cheek. Her eyes sparkled, those same amber eyes. Her wrist rested on the table, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark. The same one. He closed the album, chest tight, and sat in stunned silence. Could it really be her? Was the girl at the market the sister they lost? No one else would believe it. Not Julian, not Brandon, and especially not their father. The idea would be dismissed as wishful thinking. A fantasy. And if he was wrong, he didn't want to give anyone false hope. But what if he was right? Elias stared at the photo again. Same eyes. Same mark. Same age. Even that tiny scar above the eyebrow. Keisha had gotten it falling from her tricycle. He remembered helping bandage it. There were too many signs. He had to know more. He pulled out his phone and called the only person he trusted with something this sensitive, Alan Rourke, the family's head of security, who had served the Maddox family since before Elias was born. "I need a background check," Elias said quietly when Alan picked up, discreetly, on someone named Frank Streep. "He lives just outside Glenhaven Hills. Has a daughter named Keisha. Probably adopted her around 14 years ago." There was a pause. "May I ask why?" Alan's voice was even, but the tone was familiar. He had been there the night Keisha disappeared. I think she might be her." Keisha," Elias said. Another pause. "I'll have something by tomorrow." The next morning, Elias returned to the Meadowbrook Saturday market, this time dressed down in jeans and a button-up shirt, trying to blend in. He ignored 2 missed calls from Julian and a terse message from his father's assistant about a postponed strategy meeting. He spotted Keisha immediately. She was arranging her strawberry baskets with care, her hair worn loose today, the auburn strands glowing in the morning sun. Something about the way she moved, assured, capable, quietly focused, reminded him even more of their mother. "These look even better than yesterday," he said as he approached. Keisha glanced up, half amused, half wary. "Back for more strawberries or more attitude?" "Just strawberries today," he said, then added, "and an apology. For my brothers." She paused, weighing his words. "Apology accepted," she said at last, though her eyes were still cautious. You're not the first entitled guys to stop by. You might be the first to come back. I'm trying to be different, Elias said honestly. Keisha offered a small smile and turned back to her berries. Well, small steps count. Do you mind if I ask, how long have you been doing this? This market? 3 seasons, she replied, filling a basket. I rent a little patch of land outside town. It's not much, but the berries grow well there. You run it all alone? She slowed slightly, eyes narrowing. Why all the questions? Just making conversation, Elias said quickly. My family's not exactly known for that. Keisha tilted her head, then sighed. I live with my dad, my adoptive dad. Frank. He's been sick lately, so I've been managing the stand myself. Elias's heart thudded. Adoptive? She nodded. Yeah. He found me when I was 7. I had an accident when I was little. Head trauma. The doctors said it caused amnesia. I don't remember anything before that. Her fingers brushed the faint scar near her hairline as she spoke. The doctors said some memories might come back over time, but most of them didn't, she added quietly. Each word struck Elias like a drumbeat. 7 years old. No memory. Found by a man named Frank. A strawberry stand. The age matched. The timing matched. The location matched. Even the trauma. He swallowed hard. That must have been difficult. Frank made it easier. He's a good man, Keisha said. That's why this place matters so much. His medical bills are a lot. This stand helps. Elias nodded, then handed her the exact change. No extra money. No arrogance. Just respect. I'd like to learn more about your farm sometime, he said. Maybe I could stop by? Keisha raised an eyebrow. A Maddox interested in small-scale farming? He shrugged. Sustainability is trending. She chuckled. Right? Still, she scribbled her address on a small card. Saturday afternoon. If you're serious, I'll be harvesting. Thanks, he said, tucking it into his pocket like a precious clue. That evening, Elias stayed away from the family dinner. Instead, he paced in his room until a knock sounded at his door. Alan Rourke stood there, briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. Got what you asked for, he said. Elias took the folder and waited until he was alone to open it. Franklin Streep, age 63. Former pediatric trauma specialist. Retired early from a hospital in Northern California after burnout. Records showed that 14 years ago, a young girl was admitted under emergency status, a Jane Doe, found wandering along a highway, dazed and bloodied, with signs of head trauma and no recollection of her name. She remembered only one thing, her first name, Keisha. No family came forward. No match was made with any missing child reports. After 6 months with the child bonded to Dr. Streep and stable, he applied for legal guardianship. It was granted. Elias flipped to the intake form. Personal items found with child, 1 silver bracelet. Charm shaped like a strawberry. Engraved initials, Cam. His breath caught. It was the bracelet their mother had given Keisha on her 6th birthday. The initials. The charm. The strawberry. It was her. There was no doubt now. Keisha Streep was Keisha Maddox. By Saturday, Elias could barely concentrate on anything else. He skipped 2 meetings, ignored 5 calls, and drove himself to the address Keisha had written down, choosing his modest gray Audi instead of the flashy red Ferrari. The last thing he wanted was to show up like a corporate king surveying his kingdom. The property sat just beyond the town's edge, a white farmhouse with peeling paint and a sloping roof tucked against a small hill. Rows of strawberry plants stretched behind it, neat and sunlit, their leaves rustling in the soft breeze. It was modest, quiet, honest. And it felt more like home than the Maddox estate ever had. He spotted Keisha near the far row, crouched among the plants, her gloved hands moving with gentle precision. She wore denim overalls and a faded blue t-shirt. Her hair was tied back again. No makeup. No pretense. Just Keisha. You actually came, she said, standing as he approached. I thought the farm investment thing was a one-time joke. I'm serious about things that matter, Elias said, meaning every word. She smiled, then handed him a basket. Then get to work. Strawberries don't pick themselves. For the next hour, they moved through the rows together. Keisha talked as she worked about soil balance, pest control without chemicals, why overwatering could ruin an entire week's harvest. Her knowledge was deep and her passion was obvious. Elias barely said a word. He was listening, yes, but more than that, he was watching her. The way she smiled when she spotted a perfectly ripe berry. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The quiet way she paused when a breeze passed, like she was listening to the land itself. She was Keisha. And somehow she was still his Keisha. You're not bad at this, she admitted as they hauled the baskets toward a small shed. For someone who probably pays people to peel his grapes. I've never paid anyone for grape peeling, he said with a laugh. But this is definitely more rewarding. She set her baskets on a wooden table inside the shed, then turned to him, arms crossed. So, tell me the truth. About why you're really here? Elias exhaled slowly. I'm interested in you. Her eyebrows rose. Not like that, he said quickly. I mean, I think we may have met. A long time ago. Keisha's smile disappeared. I doubt it. I'd remember a Maddox. Not if you had memory loss, he said gently. You mentioned an accident. When you were 7. She stiffened. How much did I tell you? Just enough, he said. I'm not here to scare you, Keisha. But I need to ask something. What? Do you remember anything before you were 7? Anything at all? She hesitated. Sometimes shadows. Feelings. Not real memories. Before Elias could say more, a voice called from the farmhouse. Keisha? Are those berries ready for market? She turned. Almost, Dad. An older man stepped onto the porch, thin, graying, slightly hunched, but with kind eyes that squinted in the sun. You've brought a guest, he observed as he slowly made his way down the steps. Keisha smiled. Dad, this is Elias Maddox. He's curious about strawberries. The man extended a hand. Frank Streep. Elias shook it, watching his face closely. Recognition. Hesitation. And then, fear. Elias Maddox, he repeated, still gripping Frank's hand. One of the Glenhaven Maddoxes? That's right, Elias said calmly. I've been learning a lot from your daughter. Frank's eyes flicked toward Keisha, then quickly back. She knows more about strawberries than most farmers twice her age. Dad, could you grab us some lemonade? Keisha asked. Elias helped with the harvest. Of course. Frank turned back toward the house with a nod. As soon as the screen door shut, Elias leaned in. I know who she is, he said quietly. Frank turned back slowly, eyes narrowing. You don't know anything. I've seen the birthmark. I've read the hospital record. I know about the bracelet, the one with the strawberry charm and the initials KM. You found her. And you kept her. Frank's jaw tightened. Lower your voice. Did you take her? Elias demanded. 14 years ago? From Italy. Frank looked genuinely stunned. What? No. God, is that what you think? You adopted her. I didn't even know who she was until months later, Frank said, voice low and tense. She was injured. Barely speaking. Afraid of everything, including strawberries. You think I would traumatize her all over again just to hand her off to strangers? She wasn't a stranger, Elias said, trying to control his emotions. She was our sister. Our baby sister. Frank's face softened with pain. I know that now, but back then, no one matched her to anything. She didn't even know her full name. All she remembered was Keisha. That was the only piece of herself she held on to. Elias was quiet. She had night terrors for years, Frank continued. She used to scream if anyone brought her strawberries. I didn't know why at the time. I still don't. But I worked with her. Slowly. Patiently. And when I finally realized who she might be, I couldn't bring myself to tear her away again. You should have told someone. I was afraid it would break her all over again. That the past would do more damage than good. Elias didn't answer. He was still trying to process what it meant. That Keisha, their missing sister, had been just miles away for most of his life. The screen door creaked. Keisha returned, holding a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade. You two look serious, she said, setting it on the table. Frank smiled tightly. Just talking about you. Oh no, she said. Bragging again, aren't you? She turned to a small box on the shelf and opened it. Since you helped today, you get to see my good luck charm. I always keep it in the shed. She held up a silver bracelet, slightly tarnished but still intact, with a tiny strawberry charm. Elias froze. There it is, she said. I've had this forever. I don't know where it came from. Dad says I had it when he found me. Frank nodded slowly. You did. I don't remember ever hearing that story, though. Frank shifted. It was in your things at the hospital, remember? Keisha frowned slightly. Was it? I thought, never mind. Her phone chimed. She looked down and sighed. Mrs. Darby needs her delivery early. I should run it over before sunset. She turned to Elias. Would you mind helping Dad finish the sorting? I'll be back soon. Of course. She grabbed her keys and disappeared out the door. As her truck rattled down the gravel road, Elias and Frank stood in silence. She's starting to remember, Elias said finally. Frank nodded. Little things, dreams, flashes. It's begun. And when it all comes back? Frank didn't answer immediately. Then he looked at Elias and asked, "What are you going to do, Mr. Maddox?" Neither man noticed the figure standing outside the shed door. Keisha had come back quietly, realizing she'd forgotten her bracelet. But as she reached the doorway, she froze. Elias's voice was clear, steady. "She's starting to remember." And then Frank's reply, "Little things, dreams, flashes. It's begun." Keisha stepped into view, her voice low and stunned. "You knew." Frank and Elias spun around. "Keisha," Frank began, reaching for her. She stepped back. "You both knew. This whole time." Elias took a step forward. "We didn't want you to find out like this. But you did know," she said, eyes locked on them. "You stood there, talking about me like I'm not even me." Frank's shoulders slumped. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" she demanded, her voice rising. "From knowing where I came from? From a family I never met? From truth?" Elias spoke softly. "We didn't know for sure. Not at first. But now you do," she said, trembling. "And I'm just supposed to what? Accept that my whole life is a lie?" "No," Elias said. "Your life isn't a lie. You've always been you." Keisha folded her arms, breathing hard. "Then say it. Say my name." Elias looked her in the eyes. "Keisha, that's who you are. That's who you've always been. Even when we didn't know where you were, even when the world forgot, you didn't. You held on to it." A long silence. Then quieter. "So who was I before?" Frank's voice cracked. "You were our daughter. The daughter of Celia and Charles Maddox. You disappeared during a trip to Rome. For 14 years, no one knew what happened to you." Keisha turned to Elias. "And my mother?" Elias nodded. "She passed away 5 years ago. She never stopped hoping you'd come back." Keisha's eyes brimmed with tears, and for a long time, no one spoke. Then she wiped her face and said with quiet resolve, "I want to meet them. My father. My brothers. Even the ones who mocked me." "You don't have to rush into this," Elias said gently. "It can wait." "No," Keisha said. "I've already lost 14 years. I don't want to lose another day." The following afternoon, Keisha stood beside Elias at the gates of the Maddox estate, her hands clenched into fists. "Ready?" Elias asked quietly. She took a breath. "As I'll ever be." They walked the long drive, past trimmed hedges and marble fountains. The house loomed large, pristine, cold. In the entrance hall, Julian and Brandon waited, both clearly confused. Julian's eyes narrowed. "The strawberry girl?" "Elias, what is this?" Before he could answer, footsteps echoed above. Charles Maddox descended the stairs, older now, silver-haired, upright, powerful. But when he saw Keisha, something in his face cracked. He stared at her for a long moment. "Keisha?" She stepped forward, pulling something from her pocket. "I've had this since I was a child," she said, placing the bracelet in his hand. "I never knew where it came from." He turned it over slowly, reading the engraving. "To our Keisha, love that grows forever." His hands shook, his eyes filled with tears. "She kept it," he whispered. "All this time." Keisha's voice trembled, but she stood tall. "I may not remember everything, but I remember who I am. I'm Keisha. I always have been." Charles pulled her into an embrace, silent and shaking. Behind them, Julian and Brandon stood frozen, guilt flooding their faces. Keisha glanced at them and gave a faint, brave smile. "I guess we have a lot to talk about." And in that moment, beneath the grand chandelier of a house she didn't know but somehow belonged to, Keisha Maddox, farmer, survivor, sister, returned home.